Hello, Fearless Gamers, Matt here for Fearless Games, and welcome to another episode of The Joy of Painting Minis. And today we're going to be painting a 2nd/3rd edition Wraithguard miniature for the Eldar. We're going to be using the contrast paint method for this one, so the model's going to be using 99% contrast paints. There's going to be, I think, 3 elements on this model that won't have contrast paint on it. But for the most part, it's going to be all contrast paints. And we're going to be doing a battle-ready, pseudo-parade-ready level to this guy. You'll see what I mean as the video goes on. Now, as you can see, we have primed this miniature in Vallejo White. It's probably a little hard to see because of my lights. I am sorry, I'm working on getting better lighting for this. But you may be wondering why I used Vallejo White instead of the contrast primers. Primarily, it doesn't really matter to a degree. I've noticed that on the Vallejo primer, the contrast works just fine. I think the only difference between the contrast primers and regular primers is I think contrast primers have a satin finish. I could be wrong on that, but that's something I read somewhere, that it has a satin finish and that helps it flow across the miniature. But either way, like I said, also with that, I didn't like how the color I'm going to be using showed up on Grey Seer and Wraithbone, so I decided to go with white because I thought it looked the best on that one. And how are we going to paint this mini? That's a good question. We're going to paint him in the theme of the craft world Iyanden, or Iyanden, however you wish to pronounce it. I'm going to probably say Iyanden. And he's going to be primarily yellow with some blue, some black for the gun, some metal bits for the gems and the cabling, and we will get started with that. So we're going to take our primary color, which is going to be Iyanden yellow. Since it is the lightest color, and it's going to be easier to fix mistakes over the yellow than it is any of the other colors, so that's why we're going to start with that one. And give the paint a good shake, and I know, I keep saying that a lot. I apologize, guys. So one thing that you may notice, this model has a lot of flat surfaces. And it's been said, contrast paints don't work well on flat surfaces. And that is true. But there is a way to reduce the swirls and the pooling issues that the flat surface miniatures have with the contrast paint. So we might still get a few streaks and lines in the model, but they won't be as bad, or, what's the word I'm looking for? They won't be so eye-catching when we're done here. So the big thing is, as you can see, his foot here, we'll just use this as an example, it is broken up in different places. So he's got like a line on his feet, line to his ankle here, to his kneecap, up to his hip, and we're going to be painting him in stages where we drag the paint from one point into a recess. This way, it's not sitting on those flat surfaces to pool. We're actually going to be forcing the majority of the paint into those recesses and kind of help the contrast paint do what it's supposed to do. So let's get our first color out and ready. We're going to take a little bit on our brush. Going to mix just a small dab of water just to give it a little better flow, since again this is not a proper contrast priming primer. And like I said, we're going to start at his foot here and we're going to drag it up into his ankle. And if you look here, what I'm also doing is I'm trying to avoid going over the same spot more than once, because what happens with this contrast paint is once it starts to dry, it kind of gets a little bit of a film, sort of like when soup starts cooling and you get that little skin on top. That's what happens here. And if you go over the same area while it's in the middle of drying, you'll break that surface and end up causing more of that streaking issue that you see with contrast paints. So at each break in the model, we are going to clean the brush, load it up a little bit with some more paint, and then start on our next piece. So we're just going to do this very slowly over the miniature. Now, one thing I will say, I really enjoy the contrast paints for these kinds of projects. It really helped me get through a lot of my pile of shame with these miniatures, primarily because when I was doing this, I was doing everything up to a parade level standard, even the stuff that isn't part of my main force. And then when contrast paints came out, I started going, you know what? Why am I dedicating so much time to essentially miniatures that are only going to see the field when I'm in huge battles, like APOC games? Like, this detachment will probably never be used unless I go into an APOC game. So these models don't need to look fantastic and, you know, looking like I'm trying to go for Golden Demon or anything here. Not that I would ever try to do that, because I have no chance of winning any of those. So why am I spending all this time on miniatures that will very rarely see any gameplay? All I really need them is to be painted so they look nice on the table. Because the one thing I just personally don't like for myself, you know, anyone else who wants to do it, I have no problem with. But for me personally, I just don't like seeing my minis unpainted on the field. It just breaks the whole illusion for me. So got a little pooling there. So the contrast paints, I feel, was a great introduction, was a great addition to a lot of the paint range, because it just helped get all of this stuff done a lot faster. I think a squad of Wraithguard in my regular painting method would take me almost 3 days to get done. With the contrast method, I'm able to get a whole squad done in just a few hours. It has been a game changer for that. Now, as you see, I'm not doing exactly what I said I'll be doing with this paint, where slowly dragging it over, but what I'm doing instead is I'm going in A, one direction, and B, like I did say earlier, I'm avoiding areas I've already painted because I don't want to break the skin of the paint that's already dried on here. So I'm trying to be very careful when going back over areas that I've already done. That done, we're gonna go into painting the blue, which is going to be interesting. I always thought that I had the shoulder pads painted blue, but I guess I didn't, so I'll have to go back and fix that later. So we're going to do his top shoulder pads here, his loincloth, and his helmet, all in blue. So we're going to get our blue color, and all these paints that I'm using, you can see a list of them in the description of this video. So in case you want to follow along or paint them, or just use the same paint method, use the same color palette that I'm using. And we're going to once again, take a little water to smooth out the paint a little. And from here, we're going to, like I said, start from the bottom and drag it into the recesses up there. Because I'm trying to get as little of the paint as possible to stay on that flat surface. And I can also start from the bottom and drag it out. Or start from the top and drag it out into the main face of the loincloth, just getting all the paint to spread, giving it no chance to pool on the flat surfaces. And then again, force it into the corner there. Drag it and paint. The loincloth and the head are probably the most challenging out of all this because it is the flattest surface with the least amount of breaks. So you just got to be very patient and take your time. Like I said, make sure to get every bit of the paint. And like I said, try to avoid going over areas you've already painted, because once they start drying, you can go back over it if it's only been a few seconds, but after like 4 or 5 seconds, you really shouldn't go back to the area again until it dries. Then you can go back over it, and then you just gotta, like I said, blend out the paint so it doesn't leave splotches where you can see where you started to paint it a second time. Again, drag it in. Here we go. All of this guy is now painted up in his blue and his yellow. So next we're going to do the gun and the joints, which are going to be black. The reason I'm jumping to that step now is the rest of the miniature is going to be using non-GW paint, well, non-contrast paint, so we don't need to be careful too much about the coloring splotching over, because it's going to be a little easier to cover up. So we're going to go with our final contrast color, which is black. Black Templar, to be precise, because this color scheme was invented before the new contrast colors came out. So I'm going to clean up our brush one more time. One thing also to be mindful with contrast paint is the paint flows up the bristles a lot easier. So you might want to just be careful with how much paint you're loading up on the brush versus what you're needing it for, because you could end up getting more paint up into the funnel than you were hoping to do. Like this right there, it shot right up the bristles, so I had to go and rinse off the brush to get rid of that, to take care of that. So we're going to get our little bit of paint. Going to get a fine tip here because we need to be a little careful, and we're going to go and paint up those joints. And we do got to be a little careful here with how much we concentrate it, because this is a fairly dark color as far as contrast paints go. So if you put it on too thick, you'll lose the whole effect because you won't really have light and dark areas. It's a little tough because he is an older model and he has a lot of thin pieces. So we're just going to do the best we can to get in there. Alrighty, and then we're pretty much done with that. So all we have to do is, first we're going to let that paint dry. Then we're going to, before we move on, we're going to attach him to this base. Check to see if there's any touch-ups that need to be done. But again, don't want to bore you with that, so power of movie magic in. And here we go. He is now attached to a base, and I did a little bit of touch-up work in some spots, and I applied most of the non-contrast paints, because since this video is primarily focusing on contrast painting, I didn't want to waste time painting up the non-contrast bits, but I used some silver on these cables, and some gold on this little design on the gun, and a little bit of silver on the gem there. And we're up to the final steps of painting this miniature. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to apply a contrast coat on the silver bits, just because now the paint that we're using is supposed to be like, looking on GW's paint guides, this is the metallic color for like bolt gun and all that. Personally, I'm not a fan of how it looks, by itself, but I do like using it as a wash for metal bits. It functions like null oil. I guess the best way to look at it, at least from how I'm seeing it, is I look at it as a cleaner version of null oil, because it gets into the recesses without leaving a lot of these smears and stains that you're like, oh, no big deal, I'm going to be painting over it, so it's no problem. This, I find, gets you a similar effect to null oil while staying a little cleaner than null oil. Like, I really like the result, and combine it with a metal paint, I think it is a great substitute. But that's personally just me. I know, at least in the groups I'm a part of, null oil is like liquid talent, though personally I don't see it. But again, that's just me. And it's going to be hard to tell because I'm doing this in a sequence. I'm doing this, with fancy camera editing, so the time is cut down. But you'll notice that unlike some of my older videos, if you go back and watch like the old Joy of Painting mini video series, I dedicate almost like 3 or 4 episodes to the painting videos before. Mostly because you were watching me do the entire paint model from start to finish, which if you guys would rather that, leave me a comment and I'll see about doing that for future episodes, but if you like this format, no problem. But either way, I would do it in multiple videos, and each of those actually were individual days that I was painting that mini. So if you saw a Joy of Painting mini video and there was 5 parts to it, that was a 5-day project for me. And this one, as you see, is a single video. Even with all the camera edits, it still only took me, this is all being done in a single day. And so now we're going on to our final contrast color, which is just a little bit of shading on this gold trim. And since the black is underneath it, it could be a little messy. But this is just to give a little color. Pull out some definition on the bit there. Let's take a quick look. Yep. Just to add a little nice definition to that. Sorry. And then we will be moving on to the last 2 bits before this is officially a finished miniature. And then after this, there'll be some extra steps that are all 100% optional. You don't have to do any of the stuff that I'm about to do once I finish these 2 steps here, which step 1 is adding a bit of silver color to the gem in the center of this. Okay. Then we are going to make them some gems. So we're going to, I was going to do a blue effect, but then I decided he's got a lot of blue in his craft world scheme, so I'm going to avoid doing that. In replace of that, I'm going to do a nice green. And going to be using those GW gem paints, which I still have trouble with. The premise is supposed to be you start down in the bottom and drag it all the way up and leave a bit at the top. So it's supposed to be essentially a light coat of paint at the bottom and a thicker coat near the top of the thing, but it always ends up coming out like I just painted the whole thing. So it's still a work in progress on my point, but you're supposed to take a nice dollop of it, put it in the bottom, and drag it down, drag it up. And I guess the purpose is you're supposed to leave a fine like tint of it at the top, at the bottom, and leave a darker patch at the top. So just gonna go there and fix that up. Okay. And then for this guy, there we go. And at this state, you can stop the model. The model is officially done. But, like I said, we're going to be doing like a semi-battle ready setup, for semi-parade level for this guy. So we're going to just do a few highlights to just help the model pop a little bit more. So I'm going to first start with my... Now, when I say semi-parade, it's because I'm not going to do every single edge. I'm not going to highlight every single edge. I'm just going to pick out a couple of areas to make them stand out a little better. This isn't the best paint for the black, honestly, but it does work. It does help out a little bit, but you might want to go with a different, probably like a shade lighter, like Dawnstone or something, than the shade I'm using. I'm using Mechanicus Standard Gray, but I kind of like my black highlights to be very subtle. Okie dokie. That's all the gray done. Then gonna do a bit with blue. And finding a good blue for this contrast paint was probably the most challenging part, and still, it's not the greatest, but it works. And like I said, because these guys are not going to see a lot of table action, they don't have to be my A game. And I think that's a really good way to approach these kinds of miniatures. I think it's a great way to approach when you start having a huge pile of shame. Instead of trying to do a massive parade level, massive apocalypse size army, just have like your main detachment, your main force, parade level, and be a little fast and loose with the rest of it. Just like you don't have to paint all of your miniatures at one sitting. Like, so for example, I painted this guy's buddies a while ago, but I kept one just so I had one to show you guys how I painted them. So I didn't need to sit here and paint all of them all at once. I got away with just painting all except for one and then leaving him to be painted later. Just need to make sure you have a reference to the other groups that you have. So like for me, honestly, sitting off camera, I have another one of him just so I can use for reference. And then we're going to do our final highlight, which is going to be a white highlight going across. Now, since the yellow is the primary color on him, I'm going to go a little more crazy with the number of highlights. I'm still going to do just like very simple highlights, but I'm going to highlight more of the miniature than I was with like his blue and his black. Put a little highlight there. Oh, no, it really doesn't need it. Put a highlight there.
With that, highlights are done, and all that's left to do is apply transfers and add a clear top coat to the model. Now our Wraithguard is ready to join the rest of his squad and wipe the foes of the Eldar away. I hope you enjoyed this video. For more pics of minis we've painted here at Fearless Games, check out our Instagram page, link in the description. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, Fearless Gamers, take care!